Emma Winters stood at the kitchen window, absently stirring honey into her evening tea. The Montana sunset painted her childhood home in hues of amber and gold, a stark contrast to her college apartment's perpetual fluorescent lighting. 3 days into summer break, and the quiet still felt foreign after months of campus chaos. Scout's ears perked up before Emma heard anything. The Belgian raised his head from his bed in the corner, dark eyes alert, muscles tensing beneath his tan coat. "What is it, boy?" Emma asked, setting down her spoon. At 4 years old, Scout had instincts sharper than most humans. A gift from her father when she left for college, the former military training prospect had been repurposed as her emotional support animal after her mother's death. Too independent for standard service work, Scout had been perfect for Emma, intelligent, protective without being aggressive, a constant presence during her panic attacks. A vehicle door slammed outside, then another. Scout moved to the back door, not barking but vigilant, head tilted in that curious way that meant he was processing unfamiliar sounds. Emma checked her phone. No expected deliveries, no visitors scheduled. Her father wasn't due home from deployment for another 2 weeks. "Shiloh Police Department, we have a warrant." The shout came from the front of the house, followed by a pounding on the door that made Emma jump. Scout's posture changed immediately, body lowering slightly, a low rumble in his chest. "Scout, stay," Emma commanded, her voice cracking. The dog instantly, though his eyes remained fixed on the door. She moved toward the front of the house, heartbeat accelerating. "Warrant? For what?" Before she reached the entryway, the sound of splintering wood echoed through the house. Her front door crashed inward and black-clad figures poured through the opening, weapons raised. Emma froze, hands instinctively lifting. "I live here alone. What's happening?" she managed, voice barely audible over the shouting officers. "Police, on the ground now." The lead officer swung his weapon toward her. Emma's knees buckled as she, training from her father's safety lectures kicking in automatically. "Don't argue. Comply first, question later." "There's been a mistake," she said, face pressed against the hardwood floor. "I'm Emma Winters. This is my father's house. I'm home from college." A sharp bark from the kitchen interrupted her explanation. Scout, hearing the commotion and Emma's distress, had abandoned his stay command. One of the officers shouted, and the team's attention diverted. "Dog, there's a dog." Emma lifted her head in panic. "He's trained. Scout down. He's not dangerous." But the officers were already moving toward the kitchen, weapons redirected. Emma scrambled to her feet despite commands to stay down. Through the doorway, she watched Scout advancing cautiously, ears forward, reading the room. He wasn't growling, wasn't charging, just approaching with the confident curiosity he'd been bred for. "Stop, please," Emma screamed, lunging forward. An officer grabbed her arm, restraining her. "He's a service dog, he won't hurt you." The kitchen erupted with the deafening crack of gunfire. 1 shot, 2, 3. The sound reverberated through the small house, each blast driving into Emma's chest like physical blows. Scout's yelp cut through the chaos, a sound she'd never heard from him before, a sound that stopped abruptly. "No!" The scream tore from Emma's throat as she broke free, stumbling into the kitchen. Scout lay on his side, blood pooling on the white linoleum tiles. His dark eyes, still open, found Emma's face. His tail thumped once against the floor, a final gesture of recognition, before his body went still. Emma collapsed beside him, hands hovering over his body, afraid to touch, afraid to confirm what she already knew. The officers stood in a semicircle, weapons lowered now, faces registering the first hints of doubt. "Ma'am, the dog was aggressive," one officer said mechanically, though his voice lacked conviction. "We had to neutralize the threat." Emma couldn't respond. Her hands finally found Scout's still warm fur, fingers digging into the familiar coat. The room blurred through her tears. "Check the address," a voice muttered. Papers rustled. "Shit," another officer whispered. "It's 223 Cottonwood Lane. This is 232. The wrong house. They had broken into the wrong house. Emma reached for her phone with blood-streaked hands. Her father's contact information appeared on the screen, the photo showing him in civilian clothes, his military career deliberately understated. Few people in Shiloh knew exactly what Colonel James Winters did during his overseas deployments. Few understood that the quiet, polite man who volunteered at the Veterans Center when home had more confirmed kills than any other operative in Delta Force history. The phone rang 4 times before connecting. Satellite delay from wherever classified location he currently occupied. "Emma, everything okay?" His voice, calm and measured as always, broke something in her. A sob escaped before she could form words. "Dad," she managed finally, stroking Scout's cooling body. "They shot Scout. The police. They came into the house. Wrong address. He wasn't doing anything, Dad. He wasn't attacking. They just shot him." The line went silent for so long Emma wondered if the connection had failed. When Colonel Winters finally spoke, his voice had changed. Not louder, not emotional, just different. It was the voice Emma had heard only twice before, once when he'd received news of a teammate's death, once when her mother had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. "I understand," he said simply. "I'm coming home. Tomorrow, don't speak to anyone official until I arrive. No statements, no signing anything, clear?" "Clear," Emma whispered, military brat enough to recognize an order. "Take pictures of everything. The door, the dog, your surroundings, document it all." Emma nodded, then realized he couldn't see her. "Yes." "I love you, Emma." A pause. "This will be addressed." The line went dead. Emma lowered the phone, her free hand still buried in Scout's fur. Outside, she could hear the officers conferring in low, urgent voices. They had no idea what they had just set in motion. No idea who would be landing at Billings Logan International Airport tomorrow. No idea that killing a girl's dog was about to bring the most lethal Delta Force commander in American military history directly to their doorstep. Morning light streamed through the kitchen windows, illuminating the dried blood on the linoleum floor. Emma hadn't cleaned it yet. Her father had been explicit about documenting everything, and something in his tone had made it clear that everything meant precisely that. So Scout's blood remained, a dark accusation against the white tiles. The knock at the door was soft, almost apologetic. Emma tensed, her hand instinctively reaching for her phone. She'd slept on the couch, unable to face her bedroom without Scout's familiar weight at the foot of her bed. "Ms. Winters, Police Chief Robert, may I come in?" Emma approached the shattered front door, now temporarily secured with a board the officers had hastily installed before departing the previous night. Through the side window, she could see a heavy-set man in his 50s, gray-haired, wearing a crisp uniform adorned with badges and insignia that meant nothing to her. "My father instructed me not to speak with any officials until he arrives," she said through the gap. The chief's expression tightened momentarily before settling into practiced sympathy. "I completely understand. I just wanted to personally express my deepest regrets about what happened last night. A terrible mistake was made." Emma said nothing, her mother's advice echoing in her memory. Silence often reveals more than speech. The chief shifted uncomfortably in the void her silence created. "We're conducting a full internal investigation," he continued. "Officer has been placed on administrative leave pending the results. The department will, of course, cover all expenses related to your door and other matters." Other matters. A clinical euphemism for Scout's body, now wrapped in his favorite blanket in the garage, waiting for her father's arrival before burial. "When does your father return?" The question seemed casual, but Emma caught the undercurrent of concern. "Today," she answered simply. "James Winters, correct, Army." Emma nodded. "Special forces of some kind, if I recall." Again, she remained silent, watching the calculation behind his eyes. Her father's career was classified enough that most people in Shiloh knew only the vaguest outlines. military, often deployed, something to do with special operations. The specifics of his missions, his precise role, the number of operations he'd led or lives he'd taken remained buried in Pentagon files with security clearances higher than most generals possessed. "Well," the chief continued with forced brightness, "please have him contact me directly when he arrives. In the meantime, this should help with immediate expenses." He extended an envelope through the gap in the door. Standard department procedure in these unfortunate situations. Emma took the envelope without opening it. "Is there body camera footage?" The question clearly caught the chief off guard. "Excuse me." "From last night. Your officers wear body cameras, correct? I'd like copies of all footage." Chief's smile stiffened. "That would be part of the investigation, Ms. Winters. I'm afraid it's not something we can release until our internal review is complete." "My father will want to see it." Something flashed across the chief's face, irritation, perhaps concern. "As I said, have your father contact me directly. We'll handle this appropriately." He stepped back, adjusting his belt with practiced authority. "Again, my sincere condolences for your loss. The department truly regrets this incident." After he departed, Emma opened the envelope. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a form releasing the police department from all liability upon signature. She placed both on the counter without a second glance. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her father. "Landed in Billings. Driving now. ETA 2 hours." Emma moved through the house methodically, taking additional photographs as instructed. The splintered front door frame, the blood on the kitchen floor, Scout's empty bed in the corner, the warrant paperwork the officers had left behind in their hasty departure. Her phone rang again, an unknown local number. "Hello. Emma Winters. This is from the Shiloh Sentinel. I'm a reporter covering local government. I understand there was an incident at your home last night involving the police department." Emma hesitated. Her father had said no officials, but a journalist wasn't precisely that. "How did you hear about it?" "Police scanner chatter last night, followed by some very interesting whispers from within the department this morning." The woman's voice was direct, professional. "I've been investigating a pattern of incidents involving this department for the past 8 months. Your situation might fit into a larger context I'm documenting." "What kind of pattern?" "Excessive force complaints that disappear, warrant executions at incorrect addresses, missing body camera footage during controversial encounters." A pause. "I'd like to meet with you if possible." Emma glanced at the clock. "I can't today. My father is returning home and we have arrangements to make." "Your father is Colonel Winters, correct?" Emma's grip tightened on the phone. "How do you know that?" "Public records, property tax information." A hesitation. "And I have sources within military communities. Your father's name carries certain implications." "My father serves his country honorably," Emma replied stiffly. "I have no doubt," answered quickly. "And from what I understand, he serves it with exceptional skill. The kind of skill that might make certain local officials nervous, given the circumstances." The implication hung in the air. Emma found herself wondering what records this journalist had accessed, what connections she had made. "I need to go," Emma said finally. "I can meet you tomorrow, perhaps." "Tomorrow works. And Ms. Winters, you might want to check social media. Someone posted cell phone video of the police leaving your house last night. It's already circulating locally." After ending the call, Emma found the video easily enough. Shaky footage showed officers exiting her house, one carrying what appeared to be a wrapped bundle, Scout's body. Comments beneath the post ranged from outraged to dismissive. One caught her attention. "Isn't that the Winters place? The guy who's some kind of special forces badass?" Emma closed the app as headlights swept across the living room wall. A rental car pulled into the driveway. Through the window, she watched her father emerge, tall, trim, silver-haired but moving with the fluid economy of a man half his age. He wore civilian clothes, jeans, a button-down shirt, a light jacket despite the summer heat. Nothing about his appearance suggested his profession except perhaps the alertness with which he surveyed the property before approaching the house. Emma opened the door before he could knock, falling into his embrace. For a moment, she was a child again, secure in the knowledge that her father could fix any problem, solve any crisis. "Where is he?" Colonel Winters asked softly after releasing her. "In the garage. I wrapped him in his blanket." Her father nodded, his face revealing nothing as he surveyed the damaged door frame. "Show me everything. Then tell me everything. Don't edit or summarize. I need facts, not interpretations." As Emma led him through the house, she recognized the shift in him, the transition from father to operator. His eyes details with mechanical precision, missing nothing, his questions precise and targeted. When they reached the kitchen, he knelt beside the bloodstain, touching it lightly with his fingertips. "I should have cleaned it," Emma murmured. "No, you did exactly right." He stood, surveying the room, reconstructing the scene in his mind. How many officers? What positions? What were their exact words? What was Scout doing when they fired? Emma answered each question as accurately as possible, watching her father absorb and process the information without visible emotion. Only when they entered the garage, and he saw the blanket-trapped bundle, did a flicker of something cross his face, a momentary break in his professional detachment. He knelt beside Scout's body, gently folding back the blanket to expose the dog's head. His hand rested briefly on the cold fur. "I'm sorry, old friend," he whispered, so softly Emma barely heard it. "You did your job." When he stood and turned to her, Emma saw something in her father's eyes she had never witnessed before, a cold, focused intent that made her understand, for the first time, why men who had served with him spoke his name with such reverence and caution. "We'll bury him at sunset," Colonel Winters said quietly, "and then we'll discuss how this situation will be addressed." Grave wasn't deep, but it was precisely dug, corners squared, sides even, dimensions exact. Colonel James Winters worked with methodical efficiency, the shovel rising and falling in a steady rhythm as the hole took shape beneath the old oak tree at the edge of the property. He'd removed his button-down shirt despite the cooling evening air, his t-shirt revealing forearms corded with lean muscle and marked with scars Emma had never asked about. From the porch, she watched her father work. There was something ritualistic in his movements, something that went beyond the simple task of digging a hole. He was processing, compartmentalizing, channeling emotion into physical exertion, habits formed over 3 decades of military service where feelings were luxuries rarely afforded. The chief had called 4 times. Emma had let each call go to voicemail. "Ready," her father said finally, climbing from the grave. He hadn't broken a sweat despite the labor, his breathing calm and controlled. Together, they carried Scout's blanket-trapped body from the garage. Emma had placed his favorite toy, a frayed rope knot, alongside him earlier. Colonel Winters lowered the bundle with a gentleness that made Emma's throat tighten. He'd always been like that, capable of astonishing tenderness despite what his hands had done elsewhere in the world. Her mother had called it his contradiction. "Would you like to say something?" he asked, standing at the graveside. Emma knelt, placing her hand on the blanket one last time. "He was the best dog," she said simply, her voice cracking. "He helped me when I couldn't help myself. He deserved better than this." Her father nodded, his face composed but eyes revealing a depth of understanding that went beyond words. When she stepped back, he took her place, kneeling beside the grave. From his pocket, he something metallic that caught the fading sunlight, a set of service tags. "You weren't officially one of mine," he said quietly to the bundle, "but you served with honor nonetheless." He tucked the tags into the fold of the blanket, then stood. They filled the grave together, neither speaking until the mound of earth was shaped and tamped down. Emma placed a large stone at the head as a temporary marker. "Come," her father said finally, "we need to talk." Inside, he showered quickly while Emma prepared coffee. When he emerged, he wore fresh clothes and carried a slim laptop bag she'd never seen before. His hair was still damp, but something about him had changed. A subtle shift in posture and demeanor that transformed him from grieving dog owner to something else entirely. This was the version of her father that existed in classified mission reports and redacted operational summaries. "I've made some calls," he said, accepting the coffee cup she offered. "Reached out to contacts who owe me favors." "What kind of contacts?" Emma asked, settling across from him at the kitchen table. "The kind who can access information quickly and discreetly." He opened the laptop, typing a password so lengthy Emma lost track midway through. "The first step is establishing facts, not assumptions, not impressions, verifiable facts." The screen illuminated his face with a blue glow. "This department has a history," he continued, scrolling through documents Emma couldn't quite see. "Excessive force complaints filed and dismissed. 2 officer-involved shootings in the past 18 months, both ruled justified despite questionable circumstances. 4 cases of warrant execution at incorrect addresses." He looked up. "Your incident makes 5. How did you get this information so quickly?" A faint smile touched his lips. "I've spent 3 decades building networks, Emma. Information is often more valuable than ammunition." He turned the laptop so she could see the screen. On it was an organizational chart of the Shiloh Police Department: names, ranks, reporting structures. Certain names were highlighted in different colors. "Chief Robert," her father said, pointing to the top of the chart. 27 years with the department, last 15 as chief. Former military, National Guard, never deployed. The red highlights are officers with multiple complaints in their files. The yellow are those with connections to the chief outside the department: family, business interests, social organizations. Emma stared at the screen, unsettled by the thoroughness of the information. "Dad, how did you compile all this in a few hours?" "I didn't. I made a phone call to someone who specializes in this kind of intelligence gathering, someone who owes me his life 3 times over." He closed the laptop. "The officer who shot Scout, Jeffrey, 4 years on the force. 2 prior excessive force complaints, both dismissed. Before joining the department, he washed out of Marine Corps basic training for failure to adapt to military discipline." The clinical precision with which her father delivered this information sent a chill through Emma. "What are you planning to do?" Colonel Winters sipped his coffee, his expression unreadable. "Nothing yet. Information gathering comes first. Action follows only when objectives are clear." "These men killed Scout," Emma said, her voice hardening. "They broke into our home on a mistake and shot him for no reason." "I'm aware." The controlled calmness in her father's voice made his anger more apparent, not less. "But reactions based on emotion lead to errors. Errors lead to failure. This situation will be addressed properly." A knock at the door interrupted them. Colonel Winters moved with surprising speed, positioning himself between Emma and the entrance, his body language shifting subtly into something more alert, more dangerous. "Ms. Winters, it's from the Sentinel. We spoke earlier." Emma glanced at her father, who nodded slightly after a moment's consideration. The journalist on the doorstep was younger than Emma had expected, early 30s perhaps, with short black hair and rectangular glasses. She carried a messenger bag and a professional-grade camera. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of Colonel Winters. "You must be Emma's father," she said, extending her hand. "Shiloh Sentinel." "Colonel James Winters," he replied, his handshake brief but polite. "My daughter mentioned your call." "I know we scheduled for tomorrow, but there's been a development," said, her gaze shifting between them. "The department just held an emergency press conference. They're claiming the dog attacked officers during a high-risk warrant execution. They've released an edited snippet of body camera footage that conveniently begins just as your dog approaches them. Colonel Winters's expression didn't change, but Emma felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees. "May I come in?" asked. "I think we might have aligned interests." Her father stepped aside, gesturing her into the living room with a courtesy that belied the tension Emma could sense coiling within him. "They're getting ahead of the story," continued once seated, removing a tablet from her bag, "creating the narrative before it can develop organically. Classic damage control." She handed the tablet to Emma. "This is what they released." The video showed Scout advancing toward the camera, the footage stabilized and cropped to eliminate surrounding context. The dog's ears were forward, his posture alert, a stance Emma recognized as curious investigation, not aggression. But to someone unfamiliar with canine body language, it might appear threatening. "The department is claiming officer acted according to protocol," continued. Chief stated, and I quote, "While this outcome is regrettable, our officers must make split-second decisions to ensure their safety in potentially volatile situations." Colonel Winters had remained standing, his position allowing him to observe both the front door and the journalist simultaneously. "Ms., what exactly is your interest in this situation?" She met his gaze directly. "I've been investigating this department for 8 months. Pattern of excessive force, particularly involving minorities and lower-income residents. Questionable warrant executions. Internal investigations that go nowhere. Your daughter's case is the first incident involving someone with the resources and connections to potentially expose what's happening." "And your angle?" "Justice primarily," she replied without hesitation. "Consideration secondarily, if I'm being completely honest." A ghost of a smile touched Colonel Winters's face. "I appreciate the candor." He glanced at Emma. "What sources do you have within the department?" "2 officers uncomfortable with the direction things have gone. One dispatcher who logs when body camera footage is uploaded, or isn't, and a city council member who's been stonewalled when requesting complaint statistics." Colonel Winters nodded slightly. "And what do you know about me, Ms.?" The question hung in the air, its simplicity masking its significance. Hesitated, clearly weighing her response. "Officially, decorated Army officer, specific assignments classified, multiple deployments to undisclosed locations, recently promoted to full colonel." She paused. "Unofficially, Delta Force operator with one of the highest mission completion rates in special operations history. Details redacted, but enough whispers exist to form an outline." Emma glanced at her father, searching his face for confirmation or denial. He offered neither. "Ms., he said finally, "I believe we may be able to help each other, but I need to be absolutely clear about something." He stepped forward, his posture relaxed yet somehow more commanding for its lack of obvious tension. "This situation will be resolved through legal and proper channels. If you're expecting or hopping for some sort of dramatic retribution, you will be disappointed." Nodded slowly. "Understood, Colonel, though I admit such a scenario would make for a more sensational headline." "The best operations," he replied, "are the ones that never make headlines at all." The basement of the Winters home had always been off-limits to Emma's friends growing up. Her father had converted it into a home office years ago, installing security measures that seemed excessive to most, but were standard procedure for a man with his clearance levels. Emma now understood why as she descended the stairs, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Colonel Winters had been working through the night. The space had transformed in less than 24 hours, one wall now covered with printouts, photographs, and maps connected by colored strings. A dual-monitor setup displayed scrolling information on one screen and security camera feeds on the other. "You installed cameras?" Emma asked, setting a cup beside her father. "This morning before you woke up." He didn't look up from the document he was studying. "Perimeter coverage, motion sensors on all approaches, standard precaution." Standard for whom? Emma wondered, but didn't ask. The basement temperature seemed carefully regulated, cool enough to keep the multiple electronic devices from overheating. Her father sat with perfect posture despite having been awake for nearly 36 hours, his focus unwavering. "Misinformation checks out," he said, gesturing to a section of the wall covered with newspaper clippings. "The pattern of incidents she described is verifiable through public records, though the department has been careful to minimize publicity." Emma approached the wall, scanning the articles. Most were small pieces buried in the back pages of the local paper, routine police reports presenting incidents in the most favorable light possible. "What about the body camera footage?" she asked. "They only released a few seconds." "Precisely." Colonel Winters sipped his coffee. "According to departmental policy, which I obtained through a contact at the State Attorney General's office, officers must activate cameras at the beginning of any interaction with the public. The edited segment they released begins several minutes after they would have approached our property." "So where's the rest?" Her father finally looked up, his eyes revealing a cold certainty. "Either deliberately or deleted, but digital evidence is rarely truly gone." He tapped a key on his laptop. "I've submitted a formal request through legal channels for the complete footage. Simultaneously, I've engaged other resources to explore alternative acquisition methods." Emma recognized the carefully chosen phrasing. "You mean hacking?" "I mean information retrieval through specialized channels." He stood, stretching subtly. "Meanwhile, I've been analyzing property records and arrest patterns in Shiloh over the past 3 years. Look at this." He pulled up a map on the second monitor, with color-coded pins scattered across the town grid. Red pins are locations where warrants were executed with force. Blue are properties recently purchased by a development company called Shiloh Ridge Ventures. Notice anything? Emma studied the pattern. The red pins clustered in neighborhoods where blue pins had recently appeared. They're targeting the same areas. "Precisely. Now look at this." He switched to a corporate registration document. "Shiloh Ridge Ventures. Check the board of directors." Emma scanned the names, stopping at one that was highlighted. "Robert." "The police chief's son," her father explained. "He serves as legal counsel for a company that benefits when property values decline due to perceived crime problems or when owners are incentivized to sell quickly. Meanwhile, his father's department conducts aggressive policing in the same neighborhoods." "That's a conflict of interest," Emma said, the implications becoming clear. "At minimum." Colonel Winters stood, moving to the wall of documents. "There's more. The department received military surplus equipment 3 years ago through a federal program, tactical gear, weapons, even an armored vehicle. Since then, the number of high-risk warrant executions has increased 340%. Officer injuries have decreased, but civilian complaints have skyrocketed." Emma felt a chill despite the room's controlled temperature, and Scout was just collateral damage in all this. A symptom of a systemic problem. Her father's voice remained clinical, but Emma could sense the controlled anger beneath it. "They've militarized without the discipline or training that military operations require. They've adopted tactics without understanding the strategic implications." A soft beep from his phone interrupted them. Colonel Winters checked the message, his expression unchanging. Source came through. "The complete body camera footage has been secured." Emma moved to his side as he opened a video file on his laptop. The timestamp showed 8:17 p.m., nearly 10 minutes before the edited segment the department had released. The footage began with Officer and 3 others approaching a house. Not their house, Emma realized, but another on their street. "Addresses in this neighborhood are a mess," one officer commented. "Where's 223 Cottonwood?" "Should be this next one," replied, gesturing toward the Winters home. "Target is supposedly a college kid dealing prescription meds." "Intel solid on this," Another officer asked. Chief says it's good, confidential informant. They approached the Winters home without further verification of the address. What followed was exactly as Emma remembered. The announcement, the forced entry, her compliance, Scout's appearance, and then the shooting. But the unedited footage revealed crucial details absent from the department's release. Scout had approached slowly, ears forward but not aggressive, no barking or growling. Had fired without warning, the first shot causing Scout to yelp and turn away. The second and third shots hit him as he attempted to retreat. Jesus, one officer muttered afterward. Was that necessary? Dog was coming right at me, replied defensively. Then came the realization they'd raided the wrong house, the panicked radio call, the hasty conference about getting their story straight. The informant must have given us bad information, insisted. Not our fault. Chief isn't going to like this, another officer warned. Colonel Winters stopped the video, his expression unchanged despite the damning evidence they just witnessed. This confirms what we suspected. Now we have documentation. We need to release this, Emma said, anger building in her chest. They're lying about what happened. Not yet. Her father's voice was calm but firm. Information is leverage. Once revealed, it loses much of its power. Timing is crucial. A knock at the front door upstairs interrupted them. On the security monitor, they could see Chief standing on the porch, alone this time, hands clasped behind his back. I'll handle this, Colonel Winters said, closing his laptop. Observe but don't intervene unless I signal you. Emma followed him upstairs, remaining in the hallway as her father opened the door with a polite but reserved expression. Chief, what can I do for you? The chief removed his hat, a gesture of respect that seemed rehearsed rather than genuine. Colonel Winters, I was hoping we might have a moment to discuss yesterday's unfortunate incident. Of course, her father stepped back, allowing the chief to enter. Would you like coffee? No, thank you, this won't take long. Remained standing, his gaze taking in the living room with a policeman's practiced assessment. First, let me express my sincere condolences for the loss of your daughter's dog, a most regrettable situation. Colonel Winters said nothing, waiting with the patience of a man who had spent countless hours in surveillance positions where the slightest movement could mean death. Shifted uncomfortably in the silence. I understand you've made some inquiries about our department, requested records, spoken with certain individuals. I'm gathering information, her father confirmed, his tone neutral. Standard procedure following an incident of this nature. Of course. The chief forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I wanted to personally assure you that the department is conducting a thorough internal investigation. Officer has been placed on administrative leave pending its conclusion. I appreciate that, Colonel Winters replied. When might we expect this investigation to conclude? These things take time, Colonel. Thoroughness is critical to ensure justice is properly served. Gaze sharpened slightly. I understand you have a distinguished military record, special operations if I'm not mistaken. My service record is classified in parts, her father answered smoothly. But yes, I've served overseas in various capacities. A man with your expertise must understand the difficult split-second decisions officers sometimes face in potentially threatening situations. Emma watched her father's expression remain perfectly composed, though she knew him well enough to recognize the dangerous glint that appeared in his eyes. Chief, he said quietly, I've made tactical decisions in environments ranging from densely populated urban centers to remote mountain passes. I've led men in situations where the wrong choice meant certain death. So yes, I understand split-second decision-making quite well. He took a step forward, his posture relaxed yet somehow commanding the space. Which is precisely why I recognize poor training, inadequate threat assessment, and unnecessary escalation when I see it. The chief's face tightened. With all due respect, Colonel. The respect, Chief, would have been proper verification of an address before executing a warrant. It would have been appropriate threat assessment before discharging a firearm. It would have been truthful reporting afterward instead of edited footage designed to mislead the public. Colonel Winters delivered each point with surgical precision, his voice never rising. That would have been respectful. His expression hardened. I see Ms. has been sharing her theories with you. I should caution you that she has a history of sensationalizing stories for her own professional advancement. I form my own assessments, Chief, based on evidence, not theories. The two men stood facing each other, the tension palpable. From her position in the hallway, Emma was reminded of nature documentaries where predators assessed one another, calculating risks and advantages before deciding whether to attack or retreat. Chose retreat. Well, he said, forcing another smile, I just wanted to personally assure you that we're handling this matter appropriately. The department is prepared to offer additional compensation for your loss, of course. That won't be necessary at this time, Colonel Winters replied. I prefer to wait for the complete investigation results before discussing resolution. The chief nodded, replacing his hat. As you wish, I'll keep you informed of our progress. At the door he paused. Colonel, I hope we can resolve this situation amicably, for everyone's benefit. After departed, Emma emerged from the hallway. That sounded like a threat. Her father watched the chief's car pull away on the security monitor. It was a warning. He's realized who he's dealing with and is attempting to gauge my intentions. He turned to Emma, his expression softening slightly. He's also underestimating what we know and what we're capable of proving. What's our next step? Colonel Winters checked his watch. We have a meeting in 30 minutes with someone who may provide additional insight. Meanwhile, I need you to contact Ms. Tell her we're ready to discuss a more formal collaboration. Shiloh Police Department headquarters occupied a modern two-story building at the edge of downtown, its architecture an incongruous blend of small-town charm and institutional severity. Glass doors led to a lobby decorated with community service awards and framed photographs of officers past and present. American and state flags flanked the entrance to the administrative offices. Colonel Winters arrived precisely at 3:00 p.m., dressed in a charcoal suit that somehow managed to look both civilian and military in its impeccable tailoring. He carried a slim black briefcase and wore the expression of a man attending to routine business rather than executing a carefully orchestrated operation. I have an appointment with Chief, he informed the desk sergeant, his tone polite but carrying the natural authority that had made men follow him into situations few would voluntarily enter. Your name, sir? The sergeant's eyes widened slightly as Colonel Winters identified himself. Oh, yes, the chief is expecting you. I'll let him know you're here. 5 minutes later, Colonel Winters was escorted into his office, a spacious room with windows overlooking the department parking lot. Plaques and certificates covered one wall. A glass-fronted cabinet displayed various commendations and awards. Behind the substantial oak desk, Chief rose to greet his visitor with a forced cordiality that didn't reach his eyes. Colonel Winters, thank you for coming in. I was somewhat surprised by your call. I appreciate you making time, Chief. Colonel Winters settled into the offered chair, placing his briefcase beside him. I believe direct communication is generally the most efficient approach to resolving complicated situations. Nodded, resuming his seat. Completely agree, and I'm pleased to inform you that our internal review is progressing. Officer remains on administrative leave and I'm not here about Officer specifically, Colonel Winters interrupted calmly, though his actions are certainly part of the larger issue I'd like to address. The chief's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. And what issue would that be, Colonel? Systemic deficiencies within your department that created the conditions for what happened to my daughter's service animal. Colonel Winters maintained steady eye contact, deficiencies that extend beyond a single incident or officer. Leaned back, his chair creaking slightly. That's quite an accusation from someone who's been in town less than a week. 3 days, actually. Colonel Winters smiled slightly. But I've always been efficient at intelligence gathering and situation assessment, necessary skills in my line of work. And what exactly have you assessed about my department, Colonel? The chief's tone hardened, the pretense of cordial discussion wearing thin. May I? Colonel Winters gestured toward his briefcase. When nodded, he removed a tablet and placed it on the desk between them. I've prepared a comprehensive overview. For efficiency's sake, I'll highlight the most critical findings. He activated the tablet screen, revealing a document with the heading Shiloh Police Department, Operational Assessment. First item, Warrant Execution Procedures. In the past 18 months, your department has conducted 43 high-risk entries. 5 were at incorrect addresses. That's an error rate of nearly 12%, significantly above acceptable parameters for any tactical operation. His jaw tightened. Police work isn't military precision, Colonel. We deal with fluid, rapidly changing. Second item, Colonel Winters continued as if the chief hadn't spoken. Use of force incidents have increased 218% since your department received military surplus equipment through the 1033 program, while criminal activity in Shiloh has remained relatively stable according to state crime statistics. Equipment modernization was long overdue, countered, color rising in his face. Our officers deserve proper protection. Third item, Colonel Winters said, his voice remaining measured despite the growing tension. Geographic distribution of warrant executions and arrests shows a statistically significant correlation with properties later acquired by Shiloh Ridge Ventures, a development company where your son serves as legal counsel. The chief's face went completely still, only a muscle working in his jaw betraying his reaction. You're implying something highly inappropriate, Colonel. I'm stating verifiable facts, Chief. The implications are readily apparent without elaboration. Colonel Winters swiped to the next screen. Fourth item, body camera compliance. Departmental policy requires continuous recording during all civilian interactions, yet your officers frequently report equipment malfunctions or submit edited footage. The unedited footage from the incident at my home, which I've obtained through legal channels, directly contradicts the official narrative your department has presented to the public. Stood abruptly, his chair rolling backward. I don't know what game you're playing, Winters, but if you're threatening this department, I'm presenting documented evidence of procedural failures and potential misconduct, Colonel Winters corrected, remaining seated. Not threats, not games. He reached into his briefcase again and removed a sealed envelope, placing it beside the tablet. This contains formal complaints regarding the incident at my home, copies of which have been filed with the State Attorney General's office, the FBI Civil Rights Division, and the Department of Justice. The chief stared at the envelope, the implications sinking in. You've gone outside the chain of command. I've followed appropriate reporting procedures for suspected civil rights violations and potential corruption. Colonel Winters finally stood, his movements deliberate and controlled. But I'm not here to you, Chief. Professional courtesy suggests offering the opportunity to address these issues internally before external investigations commence in earnest. His expression hardened. Are you attempting to blackmail this department, Colonel? I'm offering an opportunity for reform rather than public disgrace. Colonel Winters maintained unwavering eye contact. There are 2 potential paths forward. The first involves multiple agencies investigating your department, media coverage of systemic issues, and the likely end of several careers, possibly including your own. And the second, asked, his voice tight. The second involves you implementing immediate procedural reforms. Officer and the others involved in the incident at my home are terminated, not suspended. You establish a civilian oversight committee with actual authority. You implement proper training protocols for tactical operations and de-escalation procedures. Your son resigns from Shiloh Ridge Ventures to eliminate the conflict of interest. And you personally issue a public apology, acknowledging the department's failures in the incident involving my daughter. The chief's laugh was sharp and humorless. You expect me to dismantle my entire department because of one unfortunate dog. Colonel Winters didn't blink. I expect you to correct deficiencies that led to an illegal entry into a private residence and the unnecessary killing of a service animal. The reforms I've outlined address those deficiencies. Whether you implement them before or after federal investigations is entirely your choice. This is absurd. Moved around his desk, attempting to use his height to intimidate as he stepped closer. You come into my department making accusations based on what? A few days of amateur detective work, some conspiracy theories from a journalist with an agenda. You have no idea who you're dealing with, Colonel. For the first time, something changed in Colonel Winters' expression, a slight shift that transformed his professional demeanor into something colder, more dangerous. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than before. On the contrary, Chief, I know precisely who I'm dealing with, a department that is militarized without understanding the responsibilities that approach entails, officers who execute warrants without proper intelligence verification, a leadership structure that prioritizes intimidation over accountability. He took a single step forward, closing the distance between them. But more importantly, you have no idea who you're dealing with. The subtle shift in the colonel's stance, nothing dramatic, merely a minute adjustment of balance and positioning, made unconsciously take a step back. I've led operations in environments where failure meant death, not administrative leave with pay, Colonel Winters continued, his voice never rising despite the intensity behind his words. I've made decisions that affected national security, not just local property values. The only reason I'm standing in your office having this conversation instead of pursuing alternative approaches is because I believe in systems and processes when they function correctly. He gestured toward the tablet still displaying its damning evidence. This system is not functioning correctly. I'm offering you the professional courtesy of an opportunity to fix it before external forces do it for you. Retreated another step, his back now against his desk. Are you threatening me, Colonel? I'm offering you a choice between difficult reform and career-ending scandal, not a threat, an assessment of your tactical situation. Colonel Winters checked his watch. You have 48 hours to consider your options. After that, the remaining copies of my complaints will be processed automatically. He collected his tablet and turned toward the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. One final point, Chief. Should anything unfortunate happen to my daughter, myself, Ms., or any of our associates during this period, any traffic stops, any administrative harassment, any accidents of any kind, those complaints will be immediately supplemented with additional documentation that would make the current situation seem minor by comparison. I don't take kindly to threats, Colonel. His voice had regained some of its authority, though his face remained flushed. Then we have that in common. Colonel Winters offered a smile that never reached his eyes. Though I don't make threats, Chief, in my profession we call them operational parameters. He opened the door. 48 hours, I'll await your decision. In the parking lot, Emma waited in their rental car, nervously watching the building entrance. When her father emerged, his expression revealed nothing to casual observers, but she recognized the set of his shoulders that indicated controlled tension. How did it go? She asked as he settled into the passenger seat. Phase 1 completed according to plan. He fastened his. The chief now understands the severity of his situation. And you think he'll agree to your terms? Colonel Winters gazed back at the police department building, his expression thoughtful. He'll calculate his options and recognize that reform, however painful, offers better long-term survival than resistance. And if he doesn't? Her father turned to her, his expression softening slightly. Then we proceed to phase 2, but we've given him the opportunity to make the correct choice. That matters. As they drove away, Emma noticed her father checking his mirrors with the subtle vigilance that had become second nature over decades of operations in hostile territory. "Are you expecting trouble?" "Always," he replied calmly. "Hope for compliance, plan for resistance. It's why we've survived this long." Deadline arrived with storm clouds gathering over Shiloh, the darkening sky mirroring the tension that had settled over the Winters household. Colonel Winters sat at the kitchen table, methodically field stripping and cleaning a 19, a habit born of decades in environments where weapon maintenance could mean the difference between life and death. His movements were precise, automatic, requiring no conscious thought as his mind worked through contingency plans for the chief's potential responses. Emma watched from the doorway, struck by the contradiction of her father's hands, capable of both lethal efficiency and gentle comfort, sometimes within the same moment. "You don't think he'll agree, do you?" she asked, breaking the silence. Her father reassembled the pistol with fluid movements before answering. Men like rarely concede power voluntarily. They've constructed their identity around authority and control. Surrendering either, even when tactically sound, feels like personal failure. "So what happens at the deadline?" Colonel Winters checked his watch. 4 hours remaining. If we receive no communication, the complaints proceed automatically to the designated agencies. And then we prepare for escalation. He slid the weapon into its holster with a subtle click. But we maintain discipline and operate within parameters. Nothing impulsive, nothing emotional. Emma sat across from him, absently tracing the scar on her forearm where Scout had once pulled her away from a broken glass she hadn't seen. "I keep thinking about what those officers did. How they just shot him. No hesitation. No attempt at de-escalation." "Poor training," her father replied simply. "They've been equipped with tactical gear and weapons without the corresponding discipline or judgment. It's a pattern I've seen before. Giving individuals the trappings of specialized operators without the thousands of hours of training and experience that create the mindset to match." His phone vibrated on the table. Checking the display, he raised an eyebrow slightly. "Ms." The journalist's voice came through clearly as he activated the speaker. "Colonel Winters, something's happening at the police department. Multiple officers called in sick today. Chief has been in closed meetings with the mayor and city attorney since this morning. My source says there's some kind of internal revolt brewing." Colonel Winters exchanged a glance with Emma. "Any details on the nature of these meetings?" "Nothing solid yet," replied. "But my source overheard phrases like complete restructuring and liability exposure. They've called in an outside consultant from the State Police Training Academy." "Interesting," Colonel Winters murmured. "Keep me updated on any developments." After ending the call, he sat in silence for a moment, eyes focused on middle distance, a look Emma recognized from childhood when her father was processing tactical information and formulating response options. "He's exploring alternatives," he said finally, "testing whether there's a third option beyond acceptance or defiance." "Is there?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "There's always a third option, sometimes a fourth or fifth. Part of strategic thinking is anticipating not just the obvious moves, but the creative ones." The doorbell interrupted their conversation. On the security monitor, they saw a young uniformed officer standing nervously on the porch, holding an envelope. Colonel Winters nodded to Emma. "Answer it, I'll observe." The officer, barely old enough to have completed academy training, shifted awkwardly when Emma opened the door. "Ms. Winters, I have a delivery from Chief for Colonel James Winters." He extended the envelope with a hand that trembled slightly. I was instructed to wait for a response if possible. Emma accepted the envelope. Wait here, please. She closed the door partially and brought it to her father, who examined it carefully before breaking the seal. Inside was a formal letter on department letterhead, accompanied by several documents. Colonel Winters read them with an expressionless face, only the slightest tightening around his eyes betraying any reaction. "What does it say?" Emma asked when he finished. "Capitulation," he replied, handing her the letter. Though naturally presented as a mutual agreement toward departmental improvements. The letter outlined a comprehensive reform plan, matching nearly point for point the demands Colonel Winters had presented. Officer would be terminated effective immediately. An independent civilian oversight committee would be established within 30 days. All officers would undergo mandatory retraining in de-escalation, warrant procedures, and use of force protocols. The department's military surplus equipment would be evaluated for appropriate use. The final paragraph caught Emma's attention. In recognition of your expertise in tactical operations and training protocols, the department formally requests your consultation services during the implementation of these reforms. She looked up at her father. "They want your help." "A clever move," he acknowledged. "It transforms the narrative from external pressure to collaborative improvement. It also keeps me invested in the process rather than watching from the outside." "Are you going to accept?" Colonel Winters considered for a moment. A supervised rehabilitation is preferable to punishment alone. It addresses the systemic issues rather than merely satisfying a desire for retribution. He gestured toward the door. "Tell the officer I accept the chief's proposal in principle pending review of the detailed implementation plan tomorrow." After the officer departed, Emma studied her father's face. "You don't seem particularly triumphant." "This isn't about winning, Emma. It's about correction." He gathered the documents, arranging them with military precision. Victory would mean this situation never occurred at all. The remainder of the day passed in quiet preparation. Colonel Winters reviewed the department's existing training protocols, identifying critical deficiencies. Emma worked with, providing her with approved portions of the story while withholding the more sensitive details of her father's involvement. At sunset, they visited Scout's grave together. The mound of earth had settled, and Emma had placed fresh flowers beside the stone marker. They stood in silence for several minutes, the golden light filtering through the oak leaves above them. "I still miss him," Emma said finally. "I keep expecting to hear his nails on the floor or feel him jump on my bed in the morning." Her father placed a hand on her shoulder. "The bonds we form with those who protect us create a space in our lives. When they're gone, that space remains. We don't fill it, we learn to carry it with us." 2 days later, Colonel Winters arrived at the police department for his first official consultation session. The atmosphere had shifted noticeably. Officers were subdued, watchful, uncertain of their footing in this new reality. Chief greeted him with professional courtesy but clear discomfort, the forced smile of a man who had calculated his options and found capitulation the least damaging path. "Colonel Winters," he said, extending his hand, "thank you for agreeing to assist with our improvement initiatives." "Chief," the handshake was brief but firm, "I've reviewed your current training protocols and prepared some initial recommendations." They proceeded to the department's conference room, where a dozen senior officers waited with varying expressions of curiosity, resentment, and apprehension. Colonel Winters noted each reaction, cataloging which officers might present resistance and which might embrace the changes. Chief began, "As part of our department's commitment to continuous improvement, Colonel Winters will be consulting on updated protocols for tactical operations, warrant execution, and use of force guidelines. His extensive background in special operations provides valuable expertise we would be foolish to ignore." Colonel Winters surveyed the room, his posture relaxed yet commanding attention without effort. When he spoke, his voice was measured, professional, the voice of an instructor rather than an adversary. "I understand change is difficult," he began, "particularly when it follows an incident that has created tension between this department and the community it serves. But today isn't about assigning blame or revisiting past events. It's about moving forward with better processes that protect both officers and civilians." He activated a presentation on the room's display screen, showing statistics on warrant execution errors nationwide and their consequences. "The tactics and equipment available to modern police departments create both opportunities and responsibilities," he continued. "When I train military personnel for high-risk operations, the first principle isn't weapon proficiency or entry techniques. It's intelligence verification and threat assessment." For the next 2 hours, Colonel Winters led them through scenarios and decision trees, challenging assumptions and highlighting critical decision points where different choices could lead to dramatically different outcomes. By the session's midpoint, even the most resistant officers were engaged, recognizing in this civilian consultant the unmistakable authority of someone who had operated at levels they could barely imagine. "The goal isn't to make you hesitate when action is necessary," he explained as the session concluded. "It's to ensure that when you do act, your decisions are based on accurate information and proportional to the actual threat, not assumptions or adrenaline." As the officers filed out, several nodded respectfully to him, a subtle acknowledgement from professionals recognizing expertise, regardless of the circumstances that had brought him into their department. Chief remained behind, his expression thoughtful. "Your approach was not what I expected, Colonel." "What did you expect?" Colonel Winters asked, gathering his materials. "Humiliation, punishment, making an example of us." The admission seemed difficult. "Your reputation in certain circles suggested a more aggressive approach might be forthcoming." "My reputation is based on operational effectiveness, Chief, not unnecessary force." Colonel Winters met his gaze directly. "The objective here isn't to destroy your department but to improve it. That happens through training and accountability, not public embarrassment." Nodded slowly. "My son submitted his resignation from Shiloh Ridge Ventures this morning. The company has issued a statement affirming commitment to ethical development practices." "A wise decision." "An officer has been terminated, along with 2 others involved in the incident at your home. Their union may fight it, but our position is legally sound given the documentation." Colonel Winters closed his briefcase with a soft click. "Actions have consequences, Chief, but consequences can be constructive rather than merely punitive when properly implemented." As he left the building, Emma waited in the car, windows down to catch the spring breeze. "How did it go?" she asked as he settled into the passenger seat. "Phase 1 of reconstruction has begun," he replied. "Some resistance, as expected, but also recognition of the necessity for change." "Wants to interview you for her article on the reforms," Emma said, pulling away from the department. "She's calling it Transformation Through Accountability, a Department Reborn." Colonel Winters shook his head slightly. "My involvement is better left understated. The focus should be on the changes themselves, not who facilitated them." As they drove through Shiloh, he gazed at the passing streets with the observant eyes of a man who had spent his career noticing details others missed. Sustainable reform requires ownership by those implementing it. If these changes are seen as merely imposed by outside force, they'll disappear once that force is removed. "And you think they'll actually change? That this isn't just for show?" Her father considered the question with the thoroughness he applied to all tactical assessments. "Some will resist, some will comply without believing, some will embrace the opportunity for improvement. The percentages will determine the outcome." He glanced at her. "But we've created conditions where positive change is possible. Sometimes that's the most important victory. At home, Colonel Winters received a call from his commanding officer, a rare direct contact that indicated the significance of the situation. "I've been briefed on your activities in Shiloh," the voice on the secure line stated without preamble. "Interesting approach, James. Not what some expected." "Sorry." There were wagers among certain staff about how many body bags would be involved in your resolution of the situation. A pause. "I'm pleased to have won my bet on 0. With respect, sir, this was never about retribution." "No," his commander agreed. "It was about something more important, systemic correction rather than emotional response." Another pause. "Your leave has been extended by 2 weeks to complete your consultation work. The secretary sends his regards and appreciation for your restraint." After ending the call, Colonel Winters joined Emma on the porch, where she sat with a small wooden box in her lap. "Scout's tags," she explained, opening it to reveal the service dog tags and collar. "I'm not sure what to do with them." Her father sat beside her, the porch swing creaking gently. "Perhaps they become part of something new, a foundation for change, just like what's happening at the department." Emma leaned against his shoulder, a gesture of affection rare between them since her childhood. "The most feared Delta operator in history, and your solution involves committee meetings and training seminars." For the first time since his arrival, Colonel Winters laughed, a genuine sound that momentarily stripped away the layers of discipline and control. "The most effective operations are often the ones that appear the least dramatic, Emma. True power isn't in destruction, it's in transformation." As evening settled over Shiloh, they remained on the porch, watching fireflies emerge in the gathering darkness, points of light appearing and disappearing like the brief, bright moments that define lives and reshape communities. The first incident occurred 3 weeks into the reform process. Colonel Winters returned to his rental car after a training session at the police department to find all 4 tires slashed, the damage done with surgical precision. No security cameras covered that section of the parking lot, a detail someone familiar with the department's surveillance blind spots would know. He photographed the damage methodically before calling a tow service, his expression betraying nothing to curious onlookers gathering nearby. When Emma arrived to pick him up, he placed his equipment in her back seat with the same careful movements he might use to stow sensitive equipment during an extraction. "Looks like someone isn't embracing change," Emma observed as they drove home. "Expected resistance," her father replied, reviewing the photographs on his phone. "Reform never proceeds without friction, especially when it challenges entrenched power structures and practices." The second incident came 2 days later. Emma found her apartment door unlocked when returning from classes, though she was certain she had secured it that morning. Nothing was missing, but small items had been moved, a photograph shifted on a shelf, her laptop repositioned on her desk. The message was clear: someone could access her private space at will. Colonel Winters arrived within 30 minutes of her call, conducting a systematic sweep of the apartment with the efficient movements of a man who had cleared countless rooms in far more dangerous environments. He installed compact security devices at entry points and the building's maintenance records for recent access requests. "Classic intimidation tactics," he explained, checking the apartment's windows. "Creating psychological pressure through implied threat rather than direct confrontation." Emma watched him work, her initial fear transforming into anger. "Who do you think is behind it?" "Possibly, or others who perceive these reforms as a threat to their authority or identity." Her father completed his security enhancements before adding, "The department isn't monolithic. Some officers genuinely support improvement. Others view it as an admission of weakness or an attack on their profession." The third incident targeted. The journalist's car was pulled over for erratic driving by an officer who kept her detained on the roadside for nearly an hour, checking her documentation repeatedly while making veiled comments about people who don't understand real police work. The officer's body camera was reportedly malfunctioning during the encounter. Chief apologized profusely when Colonel Winters brought the incident to his attention, immediately placing the officer on administrative leave pending review. But the pattern was becoming clear. A faction within the department was actively resisting the changes, testing boundaries and sending messages. "I should have anticipated this degree of pushback," Colonel Winters acknowledged during a private strategy session with Emma and in his secured basement office. "Reform threatens not just procedures but identities. Some officers have built their self-concept around a particular approach to policing. Changing that feels like an attack on who they fundamentally are." Reviewed her notes from confidential sources within the department. "My contacts say at least 8 officers are actively opposed to the reforms, with coordinating from the outside. They're calling themselves the real police in private communications." Colonel Winters nodded, unsurprised. Typical resistance pattern, creating an alternative identity structure to preserve their self-concept while positioning reform advocates as outsiders or threats. He studied the organizational chart on his wall, certain names now highlighted in red. The question is whether this resistance will remain at the level of intimidation or escalate to more direct confrontation. That question was answered the following night. Emma was driving home from a late study session at the university library when she noticed headlights following her through several turns. As she approached a deserted stretch of road, the vehicle behind her accelerated suddenly, bumping her rear bumper hard enough to make her car swerve. Years of her father's defensive driving lessons kicked in automatically. She maintained control, accelerating rather than braking as the vehicle behind attempted to force her off the road. She activated the emergency communication system her father had installed in her car, a military-grade device that transmitted her GPS coordinates directly to his phone. The pursuing vehicle, a dark SUV with tinted windows and no visible license plate, bumped her again, harder this time. Emma's car fishtailed, but she corrected, scanning for options as the road narrowed ahead. A third impact sent her spinning toward the shoulder, airbags deploying as her car crashed through a guardrail and down a shallow embankment. Dazed but conscious, Emma released her and retrieved the emergency kit from under her seat. Above on the road, she could hear car doors opening, footsteps approaching. She extracted the compact pistol her father had insisted she carry since the incidents began, keeping it concealed as she assessed her options. 2 figures appeared at the top of the embankment, silhouetted against the SUV's headlights. They were moving with the confident stride of men who believed their target was incapacitated and vulnerable. "Police, stay in your vehicle," one called down, though he wore no uniform and displayed no badge. Emma remained silent, watching their approach through the cracked windshield, calculating distances and angles just as her father had taught her during those long weekends at remote shooting ranges. Her finger rested alongside the trigger guard, not on the trigger, proper discipline even in crisis. The men were halfway down the embankment when another set of headlights appeared on the road, illuminating the scene with stark clarity. A vehicle screeched to a halt, and a single figure emerged, moving with the fluid economy that marked Colonel Winters even at a distance. "Federal agent," her father's voice rang out, carrying the unmistakable tone of command. "Hands visible, on your knees now." The 2 men froze momentarily, caught between their target below and this unexpected arrival above. One reached toward his waistband, a motion Colonel Winters had observed countless times in theaters of operation worldwide. What happened next occurred with such speed and precision that Emma, despite having witnessed her father's capabilities before, found herself stunned. He closed the distance to the first man in 3 fluid steps, a controlled strike to the throat collapsing him to his knees. The second man managed to draw his weapon, a compact 9 that glinted in the headlights, but never had the opportunity to aim. Colonel Winter's movements had the economy of decades of close-quarters combat experience. No wasted motion, no hesitation, no excess force, just the precise application of skill honed through thousands of repetitions in training and deployment. The second man's wrist was locked and twisted in a single fluid motion, the weapon secured and disarmed before he fully registered the counterattack. Both men were subdued, zip-tied, and secured before Emma had climbed out of her damaged vehicle. "Are you injured?" her father asked, conducting a rapid visual assessment as he approached her. "No, shaken up but fine." She watched as he the restraints on the two men, who now lay face down on the embankment. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" "I anticipated escalation," he corrected, checking her pupils for signs of concussion. "Though I expected something less direct. This suggests desperation rather than strategy." Police sirens approached in the distance. The real police, responding to the emergency call Colonel Winters had placed en route to her location. He photographed both subdued men and their vehicle before official responders arrived. "These men are former officers and Michael," he explained to Emma. "Both resigned rather than participate in the retraining program. Both have connections to officer through the police union and a private security firm recently established in the county." Chief arrived personally at the scene, his face ashen as he surveyed the crashed vehicle and restrained suspects. "Colonel Winters, I had no knowledge of this, I swear to you." "I believe you," Colonel Winters replied calmly, "but it demonstrates the depth of resistance we're facing. These men believed they could act with impunity." The aftermath unfolded with methodical precision. Both men were arrested and charged with assault and attempted kidnapping. Search warrants executed at their residences revealed text communications with 4 other former officers, including discussing plans to send messages to those pushing reform. The investigation expanded to include the private security firm that had recently hired several former Shiloh officers. Financial records revealed connections to property development interests that had benefited from the department's aggressive policing in certain neighborhoods, the very practices Colonel Winters' reforms were designed to correct. 3 days after the incident, as Emma was preparing to leave for her morning classes, Colonel Winters received a phone call that brought a rare frown to his typically composed features. "There's been a development," he informed her after ending the call. "The mayor has called an emergency closed session of the city council. Apparently, there's a movement to halt the police reforms, citing community concerns about reduced enforcement capacity." "Can they do that?" Emma asked, setting down her backpack. "They can attempt to," her father replied, already gathering documents. "Political pressure often follows institutional resistance when reform threatens established interests." They arrived at City Hall to find the parking lot filled with vehicles bearing bumper stickers reading, "Support our police," and "Back the Blue." A crowd had gathered outside the council chambers, many wearing matching t-shirts with similar slogans. At the center of the group stood Jeffrey, the officer who had shot Scout, now positioning himself as a defender of traditional policing values. Colonel Winters observed the gathering with the calculated assessment of a man who had analyzed countless insurgency situations. "Predictable countermobilization," he noted quietly to Emma as they made their way through the crowd. "When direct intimidation fails, create the appearance of public support to apply political pressure." Inside, the council chambers were equally divided. On one side sat officers and their families opposing the reforms. On the other were community members who had experienced or witnessed questionable police practices, primarily from lower-income neighborhoods or minority communities, whose voices had historically carried less weight in Shiloh politics. Approached them immediately, notebook in hand. "They're trying to force a vote to rescind the reform agreement," she explained in a hushed voice. 3 council members have already indicated support for reviewing the changes. They're framing it as restoring proper policing authority. Colonel Winters nodded, unsurprised. Who's coordinating? Councilman Richard replied, the chief's brother. Emma watched her father process this information with the same calm efficiency he brought to all tactical challenges. Family connections maintaining power structures, he observed. Another predictable resistance vector. The session began with carefully orchestrated public comments, former officers and their supporters describing the reforms as dangerous handcuffing of police authority and placing officer safety at risk. Colonel Winters listened without visible reaction, though Emma could sense the analytical processes working behind his composed expression. When councilmen introduced the motion to pause and reassess the reform implementation, Colonel Winters finally rose to speak. The room fell silent as he approached the podium, his presence commanding attention without effort. Members of the council, he began, his voice measured and authoritative. You're being asked to choose between two narratives today. One claims these reforms undermine police effectiveness. The other suggests they enhance public safety while protecting officers through improved procedures. He placed a folder on the podium. What you haven't been told is that officer injuries have decreased 26% since implementation began. Successful warrant executions have increased 18%. Civilian complaints have dropped 40%. These aren't opinions, they're documented outcomes. The councilman attempted to interrupt, but Colonel Winters continued with the unstoppable momentum of a man accustomed to completing missions regardless of obstacles. Reform isn't about weakening authority. It's about strengthening legitimate authority through accountability and proper procedure. The resistance you're witnessing comes not from concern for officer safety, but from those who benefited from the absence of oversight and proper protocols. He gestured toward the crowd, his gaze finding without appearing to directly confront him. Those opposing these changes include individuals who have demonstrated precisely why such reforms are necessary, through excessive force, procedural violations, and now criminal intimidation tactics. The chamber erupted in shouted responses and applause from both factions. Through the commotion, Colonel Winters maintained his position at the podium, the calm center of a chaotic storm, a posture familiar to anyone who had seen him maintain mission focus amidst the confusion of combat. Emma watched from her seat, understanding for the first time why her father's reputation in military circles bordered on mythological. It wasn't his capacity for violence that made him exceptional, though that skill was undeniable. It was his absolute clarity of purpose, his strategic perspective that viewed resistance not as a personal affront, but as an operational challenge to be methodically overcome. As the council descended into procedural arguments about the proposed motion, Colonel Winters returned to his seat beside Emma, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. "Will they stop the reforms?" she whispered. "They'll try," he replied quietly. "But resistance was always part of the calculation. We adapt and proceed regardless." Outside in the hallway during a recess, Chief approached them with the uncomfortable expression of a man caught between competing loyalties. "My brother is under significant pressure from certain interests in town," he explained, his voice low. "This isn't personal, Colonel, it's political." "All resistance is ultimately political, Chief," Colonel Winters replied calmly. "It's about who holds power and how they're permitted to exercise it, but politics doesn't change facts or outcomes." He handed a document from his briefcase. "Perhaps share these statistics with the council before they vote. Data often speaks more clearly than rhetoric." As the chief walked away, Emma studied her father's expression. "You anticipated this too, didn't you?" "Reform without resistance isn't reform," he replied simply. "It's just rebranding. True change is always contested because it redistributes power." He checked his watch. "The question isn't whether resistance will occur, but whether we've built sufficient momentum to overcome it." They returned to the chamber as the council prepared to vote, the tension palpable between opposing factions. Colonel Winters sat with the same alert composure he had maintained through countless high-pressure situations, already calculating contingencies regardless of the outcome, the hallmark of a man who had never allowed mission failure regardless of obstacles encountered. 1 year later, Emma Winters stood at the podium in Shiloh City Hall, the polished wooden surface cool beneath her fingertips. The council chambers were filled to capacity, faces both familiar and new turned toward her with expressions ranging from curiosity to admiration to lingering skepticism. Through the large windows, summer sunlight illuminated the space, catching the brass plaque newly installed beside the entrance. Community safety through partnership and accountability. "A year ago," Emma began, her voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in her chest, "I stood in this room under very different circumstances. Many of you were here that day, when this community faced a critical decision about what kind of policing it wanted, what kind of town it wished to be." She glanced toward her father, seated in the front row. Colonel Winters wore a charcoal suit, his military bearing evident even in civilian clothes, his expression revealing nothing to casual observers, though Emma could read the subtle pride in his eyes. "The journey hasn't been easy," she continued, turning a page in her prepared remarks. "Change never is, especially when it challenges established systems and long-held assumptions. There were moments when it seemed the resistance would prevail, when intimidation and political pressure threatened to derail the reforms this community needed. The memory of that pivotal council vote still remained vivid, how the chamber had fallen silent as the final tally revealed a narrow 4-3 decision to continue the reform process. The deciding vote had come from Councilwoman Maria, who had quietly described her son's experience with aggressive policing before casting her ballot in favor of change. But today, we gather to recognize what has been accomplished through persistence and commitment to a simple principle: that public safety and accountability are not opposing forces, but essential partners. On the screen behind her, statistics appeared, the measurable outcomes of 12 months of systematic change. Excessive force complaints had decreased 64%. Successful warrant executions had increased 78%. Officer injuries had dropped 41%. Community satisfaction with police interactions had risen from 36% to 72%. "These numbers tell a story," Emma said, gesturing toward the screen, "but they don't capture the human impact of these changes. They don't show how neighborhoods once defined by tension with law enforcement now host community policing forums. They don't reveal how officers trained in de-escalation techniques return home safer to their families each night. They don't measure the restored trust that allows citizens to view police as partners rather than adversaries." In the second row sat Chief, his expression a complex mixture of professional pride and personal reconciliation. The past year had transformed him as well, from reluctant participant to eventual advocate as the benefits of reform became increasingly evident. His brother, the councilman who had led the opposition, was noticeably absent, having lost his re-election bid to a reform-supporting candidate. Today we officially launched the Shiloh model, a comprehensive approach to community-oriented policing that emphasizes proper training, transparent accountability, and collaborative problem-solving. Emma continued. "What began as a response to tragedy has evolved into a template being adopted by departments across the state." She turned another page but paused, setting aside her prepared text. This next part needed to come from the heart, not from carefully crafted rhetoric. "A year ago, I lost Scout, my service dog, my companion, my friend. His death revealed systemic problems that had been building for years. Today, I choose to believe that his loss served a purpose greater than any of us could have imagined when it occurred." Emma reached beneath the podium and lifted Scout's collar, the tags catching the light as she held it up for the room to see. "This collar now serves as the symbol for the Scout program, our initiative that pairs trained service dogs with veterans experiencing PTSD and trains police officers in proper animal handling protocols. When officers encounter service animals today, they recognize them as partners in public safety rather than potential threats. From the back of the chamber, a door opened. A young officer entered, accompanied by a Belgian wearing a specialized training vest. The dog moved with disciplined purpose beside his handler, ears alert, posture conveying the same intelligent awareness Scout had possessed. Officer and his K-9 partner Atlas represent another aspect of our reforms, Emma explained as they approached the front of the room. The department now employs specially trained animals as partners in appropriate situations, with officers receiving extensive education in canine behavior and deployment protocols. The officer nodded respectfully toward Colonel Winters before taking his position near the side of the stage. The dog sat at perfect attention beside him, a living embodiment of the training principles Emma's father had implemented. "My father," Emma continued, her voice softening slightly, "has rarely sought recognition for his contributions, preferring results to accolades. But today, I want to publicly acknowledge that without his expertise, his strategic vision, and his unwavering commitment to constructive change, the transformation we celebrate would not have been possible." Colonel Winters maintained his composed expression, though Emma detected the slight shift in posture that indicated mild discomfort with public acknowledgement. Throughout his career, his most significant achievements had been documented in classified files rather than public ceremonies. The James Winters Public Safety Training Initiative has now been implemented in 11 departments across 3 states, Emma continued. Its core principle is simple but profound, that proper training, clear protocols, and genuine accountability create safer conditions for both officers and the communities they serve. Sat in the press section, recording the proceedings with professional detachment, though Emma knew the journalist had played a crucial role in documenting both the resistance and the reforms. Her series of articles had recently been nominated for a national award in public service journalism. "We also recognize those who initially opposed these changes but ultimately embraced their value," Emma added, nodding towards several officers in uniform seated together. "True courage sometimes means acknowledging the need for improvement, even when that acknowledgement is difficult." In the year since the reforms began, the department's composition had evolved. Some officers had resigned rather than adapt to new standards, but many had discovered that proper training and clear protocols actually made their jobs easier and safer. New recruits, attracted by the department's growing reputation for professional excellence, had filled the ranks with individuals committed to the reformed approach. "The most powerful measure of our success isn't found in statistics," Emma said, nearing her conclusion. "It's found in changed perceptions and restored relationships. It's found in neighborhoods where children wave to officers instead of avoiding them. It's found in the increased reporting of crimes because citizens trust the response they'll receive." She gathered her notes, preparing for the ceremonial portion of the event to follow. "Today, as we officially dedicate the Scout Memorial Community Safety Center, we recognize that lasting change comes not through force or confrontation, but through persistent, principled reform and commitment to shared values." As Emma returned to her seat beside her father, he squeezed her hand briefly, a gesture of approval rare from a man whose emotional expressions remained measured even in personal settings. The mayor approached the podium to continue the ceremony, but Emma's attention was on her father's face. "You never intended revenge," she whispered, "not from the beginning." "Revenge destroys," he replied simply, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Reform builds. I've seen enough destruction in my career to recognize the difference." After the ceremony, they walked together through the newly dedicated building, a former community center repurposed as a training facility and public education space. One wing housed the administrative offices for the Civilian Oversight Committee. Another contained simulation rooms where officers practiced de-escalation scenarios. The main hall featured interactive exhibits explaining citizens' rights and proper police procedures. In a quiet courtyard at the center of the building, a simple stone marker commemorated Scout. Around it, newly planted gardens created a space for reflection, a physical manifestation of how tragedy had been transformed into constructive change. Colonel Winters stood before the marker, his posture reflecting the military bearing ingrained through decades of service. His expression, typically guarded in public settings, softened slightly as he read the inscription. In memory of Scout, whose life illuminated the path to reform and renewal. He would have approved, Emma said, standing beside her father. He always liked to fix things that were broken. The most effective operations, Colonel Winters replied, aren't measured by what they destroy but by what they create. He placed his hand briefly on the marker. By that standard, this mission has been a success. They were joined by Chief, who had navigated his own complex journey from adversary to ally over the preceding year. The reform process had eventually provided him with something his career had previously lacked, a legacy of positive transformation rather than mere maintenance of authority. "The State Police Academy has requested your training materials, Colonel," he said after a respectful moment of silence. "They're implementing portions of the protocol in their basic curriculum next semester." Colonel Winters nodded, acknowledging the information without particular pride or surprise. Systemic change requires institutional adoption. It's a positive development. "Your deployment extension ends soon," the chief observed. "Will you be continuing in a consulting capacity after you return to active duty?" "The framework is established. Implementation continues without my direct involvement." Colonel Winters glanced at Emma. Sometimes the most effective leadership means creating systems that function independently of any individual. As they walked back toward the main building, Officer approached with Atlas at his side. The dog's intelligent eyes assessed Colonel Winters with the natural wariness of a working animal encountering a figure of unfamiliar authority. "Sir," said, coming to an informal attention stance, a habit many officers had unconsciously adopted when addressing the colonel, "I wanted to thank you personally before you leave. The K-9 program has transformed how we approach certain situations, more effective, less confrontational." Colonel Winters nodded, extending his hand palm down for the dog to sniff, a proper introduction protocol he had included in the training materials. "The animals often demonstrate better judgment than we do, officer. They respond to actual threats rather than perceived ones." Atlas sniffed his hand cautiously before relaxing his posture slightly, acceptance from an animal whose instincts remained sharper than human perception. Later that evening, Emma and her father sat on the porch of the family home, watching fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk. A new puppy, a rescue Emma had adopted 3 months earlier, played in the yard, his clumsy enthusiasm a sharp contrast to Scout's disciplined presence but bringing a different kind of joy to the household. "Your flight leaves tomorrow?" Emma asked, though she knew the answer. Her father's temporary assignment to Fort Harrison had always had a defined endpoint. 800, he confirmed. "Back to Fort for debriefing, then likely overseas again." Emma studied his profile in the fading light. The past year had revealed dimensions of her father she had glimpsed, but never fully understood throughout her childhood. The strategic mind behind the quiet demeanor, the preference for systemic solutions over dramatic confrontation, the patience to build rather than destroy. "You could have sought revenge," she said finally, returning to the thought that had occupied her mind during the ceremony. "When you first arrived, when you saw what had happened to Scout, you could have chosen a very different approach." Colonel Winters was silent for a moment, watching the puppy's exuberant explorations of the yard. "I've taken lives when necessary, Emma. I've conducted operations with lethal outcomes when strategic objectives required it." His voice carried neither pride nor regret, simply acknowledgement of reality. But necessity is the critical standard. Violence without strategic purpose isn't strength, it's weakness. He turned to her, his expression softening in the way it did only with family. What happened to Scout was tragic, but the response it required wasn't vengeance against individuals. It was correction of the system that produced their actions. The puppy bounded onto the porch, dropping a well-chewed tennis ball at their feet with expectant eyes. Emma tossed it gently across the yard, watching him scramble after it with uncoordinated enthusiasm. "The department has been transformed," she observed. "The community has been transformed, all because you chose reform over revenge." The most lethal operator isn't the one who creates the most casualties, Emma. It's the one who achieves objectives with precision and economy of force. Colonel Winters watched the puppy return with the ball. Sometimes that means eliminating threats. Sometimes it means transforming them into assets. As darkness settled fully over Shiloh, lights illuminated the Scout Memorial Community Safety Center in the distance. A beacon representing how tragedy had been transformed into lasting change through strategic vision and methodical implementation, rather than emotional reaction. Colonel Winters gazed toward the lights, his expression reflecting the quiet satisfaction of a mission completed according to its highest objectives. Scout protected you when it mattered most. Now his memory protects an entire community. He placed his arm around Emma's shoulders in a rare gesture of affection. "That's a legacy worthy of both of you." The puppy settled at their feet, exhausted from play, as father and daughter sat in companionable silence. Tomorrow would bring new assignments, new challenges, new missions. But tonight, they could appreciate the completion of perhaps the most important operation of Colonel Winters' distinguished career, transforming loss into legacy and tragedy into lasting change. Retry can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.